Have you ever thought that disappearing would make him suffer? That your silence alone would be enough to break his pride, make him miss you, make him realize your worth? Wrong. No contact is not the punishment. It's just the beginning. Imagine this. A woman, silent, deliberate, stepping back not out of fear or confusion, but because something inside her has shifted. She believes that by vanishing, he'll start to feel her absence, that he'll wake up, regret, reach out. But what if I told you absence means nothing, unless it carries a message he cannot ignore? Because the truth is, it's not the silence that crushes him. It's what that silence says about you. It's when he realizes he no longer has access to the version of you that reacted, that waited, that hoped. It's when he senses that your absence isn't passive, it's full, charged, intentional. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." The shadow does not vanish. It waits. And when you stop playing by the rules that shadow is revealed. Not just his, but yours too. This video is not for those still waiting for a text. It's not for those hoping silence will magically bring him back. This is for the woman who has begun to understand that the real shift is not about silence. It's about who you become in that silence. This is for the ones ready to stop surviving the aftermath and start transforming it. You're not here to play games. You're here to break them. And the game ends the moment you decide. You're no longer a reaction. You are the consequence. Most people believe that disappearing is enough. That silence alone, the lack of presence, the vanishing from his life, will somehow flip a switch in his mind and make him come running back. But here's the truth most don't want to hear. Disappearance without emotional detachment is not power. It's delay. You may not be reaching out, but if you're still checking his profile, watching his stories, wondering if he noticed your silence, then you're not gone. You're just invisible in plain sight. Carl Jung said, "What you do not bring to consciousness will appear in your life as fate." And this is where most women fall into the trap. They go silent on the outside, but inside, they're still screaming, waiting, hoping, reacting. Let's talk about the 3 biggest mistakes women make with no contact. The first is using it as a strategy to get him back. You say you're healing, but you're counting the days. You're hoping he'll notice, that he'll miss you. But that kind of silence isn't power, it's manipulation. And worse, it's rooted in fear. Because you're not detaching, you're bargaining. You're still basing your worth on his eventual return. The second mistake is staying emotionally attached in secret. You don't text, you don't call. But you're watching, you're waiting for updates. You feel a pang every time you see him post. You're dissecting every move. That obsessive checking, the sleepless nights, the constant mental replay that's not freedom. That's emotional captivity. And it keeps you stuck in a loop that you think looks like strength, but smells like desperation. The third, and most dangerous mistake, is keeping him as the emotional center of your world. Even in silence, you make every decision with him in mind. You dress, thinking he might see. You post thinking he might watch. You measure your progress by whether he's noticed. That's not no contact. That's covert codependency. It's putting your inner state in the hands of someone who already showed you they weren't holding it carefully. And here's the thing, he can feel all of it. Energy doesn't lie. A man can sense when you've walked away, but are still tethered. He knows when you're pretending to be gone, but are secretly clinging to his shadow. So what's the real purpose of no contact? It's not to be missed. It's to reclaim your power. You don't disappear to provoke a reaction. You disappear to stop being a reaction. Because the moment you shift from seeking to severing, from performing to preserving, you stop orbiting his ego and start collapsing his illusion of control. And that's when the game begins to break. Carl Jung described the persona as the mask we wear to navigate the world. It's not who we are. It's who we present ourselves to be. For many men, this persona becomes more than just a mask. It becomes armor. It's how they maintain control, how they manage perception, and more importantly, how they avoid facing what lies beneath. When you stop reacting, when your silence becomes intentional and steady, you don't just create distance. You disrupt that mask. You reflect something they've worked hard to avoid, their own shadow. You see, most men aren't afraid of losing you. They're afraid of losing control over how you feel about them. That control, the emotional influence they've maintained through charm, guilt, dominance, or ambiguity, that is what gives their ego oxygen. And the moment you withdraw that oxygen, the mask starts to crack. Silence, when it's real, not performative, not strategicist, confrontational, it becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, he doesn't see you. He sees himself, exposed, undefined, no longer the center of your emotional weather. And that terrifies him. When a man loses your emotional response, he's not just losing connection, he's losing confirmation of his desirability, his control, his superiority, his grip. That's why silence, when it's authentic, is not absence. It's disruption. There are 3 clear signs that you've touched his ego, that you've pierced his carefully protected persona and struck a chord deeper than words could reach. The first is passive withdrawal. He pretends not to notice. He mirrors your silence. He goes cold, detached, maybe even posts more, smiles louder, laughs harder, but it's all theater. His sudden indifference is often a cover-up, a desperate attempt to look untouched, while internally he's spinning. He's trying to reclaim balance by pretending your silence didn't shift anything. But the performance itself is proof that it did. The second is aggression. Sometimes the silence becomes too loud for him to ignore, and the need to re-establish dominance kicks in. That's when the calm breaks. Suddenly, he lashes out, maybe with words, maybe with accusations, maybe with backhanded comments or even messages that seem to come out of nowhere. He'll say you're overreacting, that you're selfish, that you're cold. But what he's really saying is, I don't know how to make you feel small anymore, and that terrifies me. His aggression is not power, it's panic. The third is subtle manipulation. This is when he tries to draw you back in without seeming like he is. He might reach out through mutual friends, like a story, watch something you post, and then disappear again. He might plant breadcrumbs just enough to keep himself on your radar, but not enough to take responsibility. It's a test. He's asking, do I still have a piece of you? Not because he wants you, but because he wants to know he still matters. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's what happens in these moments. Your silence forces him to confront something unconscious, that he never had real power. He only had access. And now, he doesn't. Understand this. His reaction to your absence says far more about his depth than it does about your worth. A man who is whole will not be shaken by your silence. But a man who built his identity on your validation will crumble the moment you take it back. When you no longer offer your attention freely, you stop being a character in his story. You become a mirror he can't turn away from. And for a man who has never faced himself, that's unbearable. This is why your silence matters. Not because it changes him, but because it reveals him. The persona cracks, the ego stumbles, and the shadow, the part of him he never wanted to acknowledge, emerges, raw and defensive. And in that space, you realize, you never needed to raise your voice. You just needed to remove your energy and let his mask fall on its own. There's a moment after you go silent, after you stop reaching out, after you cut the last thread that tied your heart to his attention, and it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like pain. This stage, this withdrawal, it's not unlike emotional detox. Your body feels it. Your nervous system feels it. You might wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, wondering if you did the right thing. You might feel an emptiness so loud it drowns out logic. The urge to check your phone becomes almost physical. You imagine what he's doing. You fantasize about him texting, apologizing, chasing. You replay old conversations, trying to find meaning in things that were never true to begin with. And yet this isn't grief. It's not even about him anymore. It's about you and what your ego is experiencing now that it's being starved of the thing it once used for survival. This is not the pain of losing him. It's the pain of losing the version of yourself that needed him. Carl Jung described this as the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole, of breaking from the identity that was built to please, to chase, to be chosen. And when that identity starts to fall away, your nervous system screams. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. You feel anxious, but it's not fear, it's recalibration. You feel exhausted, but it's not weakness. It's the release of suppressed weight. You feel alone, but it's not isolation. It's the clearing of noise so you can finally hear your own voice. There's a biological imprint left behind when you've been emotionally attached to someone. Your body has mapped their patterns, their attention, their approval. And when that pattern is broken, your system panics. It looks for the old cues. It waits for a text that no longer comes. It reaches for a presence that is no longer safe. But here's the truth most never tell you. This isn't the end. This is birth. Because everything that is dying in you right now, every story, every fantasy, every illusion, it's making space for something real, something rooted, something yours. You are not breaking. You are becoming. And the discomfort you feel, that tightness in your chest, that ache in your bones, it's not sadness. It's the shedding of the skin that kept you small. It's the cracking of the shell that kept you caged. Jung said, "The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. That calm is not found in avoiding the pain. It's found in sitting with it, in breathing through it, in letting it say what it needs to say, and still not answering the phone. You are not alone in this. What you're experiencing right now is not weakness. It is the sacred tension before transformation, the contraction before expansion. You are not mourning love. You are mourning a role. You are mourning a version of yourself that thought love had to be earned by shrinking. That thought silence meant punishment. That thought worth came only when someone else confirmed it. And now, without the distraction of performance, without the noise of reaction, you're left with yourself. And that, at first, can feel unbearable. But stay. Don't run from this. Don't rush to replace the feeling with noise, or validation, or a rebound dressed in charm. Let this silence do its work. Let it empty you. Let it clean out the parts of you that begged for crumbs and called it connection. Let it strip away the habits that once looked like love but were really fear dressed in longing. And then watch. Watch what begins to grow. Watch what begins to return. Not the texts, not the attention, but something deeper. A knowing, a strength, a peace that no one else gave you and no one else can take away. They say the cocoon tightens the most right before the butterfly emerges. The pressure builds, the darkness thickens. It feels suffocating, but it's not the end. It's the beginning. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are being rewired. This is not the ache of abandonment. This is the initiation of awakening. And soon, the silence that now feels heavy will become the space where you meet yourself. And you'll realize, he was never the thing you were waiting for. You were. Disappearing is not enough. Not if you want to touch his ego. Not if you want to truly disrupt the version of you that once existed in his mind. Because silence without depth is just absence. It can be dismissed, ignored, explained away. But silence with intention, silence with structure, becomes a force. It becomes a mirror. It becomes the beginning of collapse. This is not about punishment. It's about reclaiming the space where your energy once lived unchecked. So let's talk about the real strategy. The one that doesn't just remove you from his line of sight, but from his emotional dominance. The one that doesn't just make you invisible, but unforgettable. This isn't a game of silence. This is a shift in identity. There are 3 levels to this, each one more confronting than the last, and each one designed to do one thing: dislodge the part of him that thought he owned access to your inner world. Level 1. Intentional silence. This is not about ignoring messages or ghosting out of resentment. This is about refusing to engage in old patterns. No more reacting, no more defending, no more explaining your silence to ease his guilt. You stop responding not just in words but in energy. He says something to provoke you. You don't bite. He reaches out with a vague, "Hope you're good." You don't respond not with words, not with likes, not with subtle signs that you're still watching. Because the first crack in a man's ego happens when the version of you he relied on to react no longer exists. He cannot define you. He cannot predict you. He cannot provoke emotion. And for the male ego, this is terror. Because your reaction is how he measured his worth. Now, you're gone. And the silence? It's not cold. It's sovereign. Level 2. Disappearance from emotional frequency. You need to understand this. They feel you even when you say nothing. Some part of them can still sense if you're thinking about them, missing them, talking about them, trying to get their attention through indirect means. And as long as they can feel that connection, their ego is intact. So you go further. You pull your energy back, not just your presence. You don't post for attention. You don't drop hints. You don't wear pain like a badge, hoping they'll see it and care. You become a mystery in the purest sense. Not because you're hiding, but because there's nothing left for them to track. No signals, no reactions, no narrative for them to control. You become the quiet space they can't explain. And the human mind, especially one driven by ego, cannot tolerate what it cannot define. He will search. He will try to make sense of the void. He will check. He will test. He will wait for your next move. But you won't move. Because now you are not trying to be understood. You are becoming whole. And that brings us to level 3. The level that breaks the structure entirely. Disappearance, followed by rebirth. Because eventually, you'll reappear. But not for him. Not in a way that says, "Look what I've become." Not in a way that invites curiosity or closure. You'll reappear by simply living. Differently. You begin showing up in the world with a kind of calm that used to be effort. You start moving in spaces that once triggered you but now feel neutral. You no longer feel the need to be validated, noticed, or proven right. And here's where the ego collapse happens. When a man sees the woman he once had emotional power over, existing fully, and he cannot affect her anymore. When he throws a line out and there's no bite. When he watches and feels nothing returned. When he realizes that your presence is no longer orbiting his. This is the death of control. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "The ego's greatest fear is not rejection, it is irrelevance." You don't need to hate him. You don't need revenge. You don't even need to forgive him for his sake. You need to become unavailable, no, just in action, but in essence. He will feel the absence not just of your body but of the role you used to play in his psyche. That space he filled with projection, validation, and power, it's gone. And that loss isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It echoes. It stays. Because the woman who was once emotionally available, accessible, reactive is no longer his to reach. You did not disappear to punish him. You disappeared to rebuild yourself. You did not go silent for drama. You went silent for clarity. And now you are not a memory. You are a mirror. And in that mirror, he sees the one thing he cannot control. Your evolution. Because when a woman no longer seeks to be remembered, but instead becomes unforgettable through her absence, that's when the ego breaks. Not in rage, but in stillness. Not in confrontation, but in realization. He no longer owns a piece of you. And that truth, that's what dismantles him. Carl Jung once said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." And this silence, this withdrawal, this decision, not to chase A's, not the act of someone running away, it's the act of someone returning to herself. Because the truth is, when a woman steps back in silence, she doesn't disappear. She expands. Her absence doesn't erase her. It echoes. It moves into the psychological space of the man who once believed she would always be there. Her silence creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, something powerful happens. Reflection, not hers, his. When you withdraw with intention not to punish, not to prove but to reclaim, you become more than a memory. You become a question, a disruption in his inner world, a mirror that no longer reflects him, but instead forces him to face what's missing. And here's what most don't understand. You don't need to speak to be heard. You don't need to fight to be felt. You don't need to be seen to be remembered. The most powerful presence is often the one that no longer needs validation. So instead of asking, "How do I make him see what he lost?" ask this: "What part of myself have I been waiting for someone else to recognize?" Because when you turn that gaze inward, when you stop performing for his recognition, something shifts not just in you, but in the energy between you. You stop trying to wake him up, and you start becoming the kind of woman who makes every man question why they ever took you for granted. This is not manipulation. This is magnetism. It's not coldness. It's clarity. Because power doesn't live in the feelings you hand out freely. It lives in the emotions you choose to keep. In the parts of yourself you no longer allow to be accessed without truth, without respect, without presence. This is the sacred alchemy of restraint, and it changes everything. When you speak less but mean more. When you show less but become more. When you stop giving your energy to be understood and start using it to understand yourself, you stop revolving around anyone's ego, and that's when your gravity becomes undeniable. A woman rooted in herself cannot be moved. Not by silence, not by rejection, not by the absence of attention, because her worth no longer rises and falls with someone else's awareness. And for the male ego, that's not just unsettling, that's threatening, because they were never afraid of losing you. They were afraid of losing access to the version of you that needed them to feel seen. Now they're left with your silence, but it's not empty. It's full of power, full of presence, full of the version of you that no longer asks to be chosen because she's already chosen herself. You don't need to shout to shift energy. You don't need to prove that you've changed. Your stillness is the evidence. Your restraint is the signal. Your refusal to re-engage in the old dynamic speaks louder than any closure conversation ever could. So stop asking if he notices. Stop wondering if he cares. Start asking if the version of you you've become could ever tolerate being unseen again. That's where the shift lives. Not in his regret, but in your release. Not in his wake-up call, but in your awakening. Because the moment you stop showing up to explain yourself, to soften your boundaries, to fix what he refused to confront, you don't just leave the dynamic. You transcend it. You rise above it. You become the kind of presence that lingers not because of what you said, but because of what you withheld. And that's where the real power lives. Not in how loud you can love, but in how deeply you can walk away with your peace intact. Not in how much you feel, but in how precisely you protect what you feel. Because silence, when it's born from self-worth, not piness, a force no ego can ignore, and no man can control. You didn't lose him. You found you, and from that place nothing else will ever feel like power again. When you stop texting him, what was left echoing inside you? That's the question. Because the silence outside means nothing if the noise inside never quiets. If you go silent but still obsess, still ache, still hope for his attention, you haven't disconnected, you've just gone invisible. This is the moment. Not to wait, not to perform, but to return. To you. Because silence, real silence, isn't about withholding from him. It's about listening to what you've been too busy, too hurt, too distracted to hear. Yourself. And the journey back to yourself doesn't begin with revenge. It begins with reflection. Start by asking, who am I without someone reflecting back my value? If no one were watching you heal, if no one were hoping you'd glow up, if no one were going to see your progress, would you still choose to evolve? Because that's the shift. You stop living to be seen. You start living to be whole. One of the most powerful tools you can use during this phase is writing. But not the kind of journaling that centers around him. Not the letters you never send. Not the breakdown of what he said and why it still hurts. Write about you. Not who you were in the relationship. Not who he said you were. But who you are becoming. Write your thoughts. Your desire. Your doute. Your rediscoveries. This isn't about creating a narrative he'll eventually read. It's about meeting yourself on the page raw, unfiltered, honest. Because the woman you are now is not the same as the one who waited for texts, the one who begged silently, the one who molded herself around what someone else would accept. She's gone, and something else is forming. Let it. Let this version of you come through without needing applause or witnesses. Let your silence become fertile soil, not a performance stage. It starts with intention. Are you quiet because you want him to wonder? Or because you are finally listening to yourself? Are you withdrawn because you're hoping he'll chase? Or because you're no longer chasing anything that makes you feel small? You shift the energy the moment you choose growth over attention. That's the real power. You no longer respond because you don't need to. You no longer check because it's not about him anymore. You no longer center your worth around what he says or doesn't say. This is the pivot point. From watch me glow to I don't need to prove I've risen. From I hope he regrets it to I no longer need him to. From I'm waiting for him to notice to I'm learning to notice myself. Jung wrote, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." And that choice happens here, in the quiet, in the space where no one's watching, no one's validating, and no one's telling you who you should be. Only you. So the next time you feel the urge to post something subtle, to stalk his profile, to accidentally run into him, pause. Ask instead, what version of myself am I abandoning to feed this moment? And is it worth it? If the answer is now, walk away. Back to the journal, back to the mirror, back to the work that isn't sexy but sacred. Because the most terrifying and beautiful part of this entire journey is realizing that your healing is not about anyone else. It's about you becoming the woman you were meant to be before the world taught you to beg for crumbs. You don't need to rise louder. You need to rise deeper. And when you do, the woman on the other side of this silence will look nothing like the one who once needed to be chosen. She will already be. Have you started to feel it? That quiet pull inside you. That whisper you can't ignore anymore. The one that says, it's time. Not to wait. Not to be chosen, but to choose yourself. If something in this video stirred something in you, something deep, something real, then maybe, just maybe, this is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of your awakening. So if you're ready, I invite you to speak it into existence. Not for me, not for him, but for you. Comment, I choose myself. Say it because it's time to stop shrinking. Say it because the silence you're sitting in is not emptiness, it's a threshold. Say it because the power you've been searching for has been quietly waiting for you to come home. You don't need to be seen by anyone else to be real. You only need to look within and see yourself clearly for the first time. Because the most important choice you will ever make is not who to love. It's how deeply you are willing to love yourself. And if this message felt like more than just words, if it felt like truth, then this is your moment, not to be found, but to return. As Carl Jung once wrote, every human life contains a potential. If that potential is not fulfilled, then that life was wasted. You are not here to be half of anything. You are here to become whole. And that wholeness, it begins now,